We're going to have Elaine Liu from University of Houston to give us the presentation. And she's currently associate editor of Journal of Health Economics, and her work has been published in various places like Restudies, Restats, JD, JIG, so on and so forth. Today, she's going to tell us about alcohol consumption and how malleable that alcohol consumption can be. So the usual format is 16 minutes followed by 15 minutes Q&A, but it's up to you. You can take questions along the way if you don't mind. And so the microphone is yours. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. And especially thanks, Simon, for inviting me. So I have this chance to present this interesting paper to you. And especially I know that it's 9 a.m. in the morning. It's very early for a seminar. So bear with me. And if you want to ask questions, feel free to ask anytime. There's no reason to wait. Okay. And this is a joint work with Marie Hinosar. And then we are trying to understand how malleable is alcohol consumption in this paper. So as economists, why do we care about alcohol consumption? I mean, as a health economist, we care about it a lot, but in general, that WHO has estimated that alcohol is responsible for 5% of all death. And beyond just the typical health consequences, alcohol consumption can actually create very broad and then heavy economic burden as well as a social burden. So from the policy perspective, there's an important reason for maybe for the government to intervene or trying to understand how can we reduce alcohol consumption, okay, of the population. So there are many economic paper have trying to investigate various factors that affect alcohol consumption, especially papers looking at how when the taxes changes and for alcohol or for various regulation, government regulation change, or when peers change, and then how social norm affect alcohol consumption. And these papers have found that, like, for instance, especially in the US, because a lot of these alcohol regulation are at the state level. And that means you can actually easily conduct these differences study, trying to understand when the state level alcohol regulation has changed, how does that affect alcohol consumption? Or there are papers looking at one aspect, for instance, when you have random assignment of roommates who drink more versus people who drink less, and how that affect your alcohol consumption. So most papers focus on one factor at a time, but our paper is slightly different. We are trying to understand how environment altogether. So when we say environment, that would include the environment of where you live, so which include both the supply condition as well as the regulation that you face, as well as the peers that the social environment you have. So all these altogether, how environment would affect your alcohol consumption. And why do we want to understand how environment altogether affect our consumption? Because you can imagine that there could be this kind of discussion of whether drinking more is a nature versus nurture. Is it something innate? Right? If it's something about you, like you're genetically more likely to be drinking, then maybe there is not much room for the environment or for the government policy to change your alcohol consumption, right? So to understand how much this environment can affect alcohol consumption and how malleable that is, that can inform us whether there is much room for government intervention or not. So our methodology is we're going to use these movers, and what we're going to look at is in this data set, the Nielsen scanner data set, which follow sets of households. It's a panel data set, and then even when they move across county, they move across state lines, we'll have information, and then we can compare. Among all the movers, some of them move to the high alcohol consumption states, and some of them move to the low alcohol consumption states. I'm just using state as a general term. Later on, we can do various robustness check to change like high alcohol consumption locality versus low alcohol consumption locality. So whether you move to higher places versus lower place, and how that affect your alcohol consumption before and after the move. Okay, and so the one main outcome that we're going to look at is these estimated the quarterly off-premise, meaning that it's at home alcohol consumption or alcohol purchase, okay, measure in quantity. And if you're interested in the total expenditure, for today's talk, I'm not going to show you much tables on the total expenditure on alcohol, but in the paper, in appendix, you can find them for the as an outcome as well. And I'll come back to talk about the Nielsen data in more detail, because I think it's important to understand like what exactly are we measuring for the alcohol consumption. So just in case if I don't get to finish, or you might have to leave early, and the main part of the paper, the main finding of the paper is that it actually alcohol consumption really converged very sharply towards the level of the destination state. So if you move to a higher consumption place, then you are going to consume more. If you move to a lower consumption place, then you are going to consume less. Okay, and not only that, like it's extremely malleable. Roughly 2/3 of the gap between the place you're from to the place where you're going to, the origin and destination, the gap will be closed almost within first quarter after you move. And this effect is very, very strong. And it's much easier to adjust upward, meaning that it's much easier to drink more when you move to a new place than to drink less when you move to a place that's lower alcohol consumption. So in terms of the literature that our paper is related to, the first is really obvious, is that there are many of these papers trying to investigate different kind of factors, and then how they influence alcohol consumption, and compared to these papers, which oftentimes use difference in differences or random assignments, we are looking at zoom in just on the movers, and then trying to understand this whole combined effect of the current environment, not just one special factor. And we are also not the first people who are trying to use these movers to identify the effect of the environment. There is actually, these are papers that use very similar methodology, but they look at different kind of outcome. So, so the Bronnenberg, for instance, they were looking at brand choice. So these are more like the marketing paper, right? They look at people who choose, they have preferences for certain brands, and then after they move to a new place, do they still have the same preferences or not? And then the Alcott and Hutt paper are economic paper that try to look at basically consumption of healthy food, right? So if you moved from a place that's not so healthy to the place that's very healthy eating, are you going to consume more vegetable and then more fruits or not? Okay, and so our paper are, in terms of the finding, we are actually in quite in contrast with the Alcott and Hutt paper, because those papers find that for the healthy food, it really converge very slowly. And compared to what we find for the alcohol, it converge very fast. And then and in terms of magnitude, it's much bigger for the alcohol consumption to converge to, compared to the convergence for the vegetable and the healthy food. And another set of literature is started by especially Rush Chetty and his co-author, that they have found that where a person grow up can have very important influence in their long-term, especially have a long-term impact in their life. And for instance, could affect the earnings. And then there are papers studying like where you live can be matter for your health. And these papers are usually quite general, right? They didn't pinpoint one aspect of why where you live matter. And then we provide a mechanism of why where you live matter. For instance, where you live can affect how much alcohol you actually consume, or how much alcohol your parents might consume. That can indirectly affect you or directly affect you and your well-being for the long run. And there's another set of literature that look at, in general, trying to study how persistent are the migrants' behavior. And then when we say migrants, you can think of these as, in our study, we only look at migration within the US, but there are other studies that also look at cross-border, like in terms of migrants who, international migrants who move from one place to another, and then whether their culture norm or their social norm or even their food preferences, whether it's persistent or not. Okay, and most of these papers that study the migrants' behavior, what they find is that there is very strong persistence. That means most of the time they will find that, for instance, your food preferences really stay with you after you move. But in our case, we actually find very fast convergence in alcohol consumption. And so maybe it suggests that alcohol is very unique, or it's very different from the rest of the social norms or the food that you consume, because alcohol is really a social goods that you enjoy, like drinking with your friends more so than the food. And so maybe that's one reason why we find such a fast convergence. In terms of the data set that we use is from the Nelson home scan panel. In case if you are not familiar, it's a panel data set from 2004 to 2017. It's representative of the US population. So basically they gave these scanners to each of the households that are in a sample, and they have asked these households, please scan all your grocery purchases, including alcohol, okay, for every single day. And once they scan, then there's information about the quantity and as well as the price, okay, that the price information is linked to the store, because Nelson also collected the information from the store, okay. And it has data and demographic information, including income and household composition, marital status, geographic location, employment status, education, age, and then we know the gender of the household head. And it's important for us to know that about their geographic location, because that's exactly what we're going to use to identify who are the movers. And the other part that I should mention, which will address this issue later, is that you notice this is about scanning the grocery purchases. That means it's only measuring your alcohol consumption at home, right? We cannot really measure your alcohol consumption in the bar, okay, or any of the on-premise drinking that we will not be able to measure, but we measure your off-premise drinking.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
So how reliable? I mean, the guy has to scan, but I mean, people can forget to scan. I mean, how reliable is this data?
There's actually a study in trying to verify this, and then they find that it's pretty reliable. And then for the purpose of our study, as long as the scanning behavior does not change correlated with the place where they move to, then that shouldn't affect our outcome, like in terms of our estimates.
So if I move to New York and I drink wine, now all my wine purchases are in a different space. So I go in some jurisdictions, sales are not going to be in grocery stores. So where does that pop in your data?
Actually, when we say grocery, that it doesn't literally need to be coming from, those are very good questions. It's exactly what we got one round of referee report back, and then these are exactly the question that the referee asked. Okay, so even though they say grocery, but they actually ask them to scan all the purchases, including, so technically, no matter whether you purchase from the liquor shop, because in the US, I don't know what's the norm in Australia, but in the US, depending on the state where you live, okay, some places where you cannot purchase alcohol in grocery from the grocery store, okay, and you have to buy it from special shops. And so if we're following, like if all the scanners are following the Nelson rule, okay, then they should scan all their purchases regardless where it come from. But of course, it could be that well, if you only scanned, you didn't follow the rule, you only scanned the grocery from the grocery store and you didn't scan the alcohol purchase from the liquor shop, for instance, okay, then that could affect our estimate. So in one set of regression, what we're going to do is we're going to restrict to people who move from similar type of environment in terms of having availability at certain store. And then we compare that to our main estimate. Okay, so at least similar retail environment between the places where they move to, and then see how that affect our results. And
Elaine, just a quick clarification. Maybe you're going to talk about this. The movers, how do you identify them? So is that the Nelson has the initial sample drawn, and then they follow them wherever they go, or it's
they do follow them where they go, and
okay.
I think these households do get paid. I don't know how much money, but they stay, and then so we can identify their zip code, even down to the zip code level, okay, of where they live, okay, from our point of view, and we can also verify it based on where they shop. And so that's also the information that we can have, but let me talk about the mover exactly right now. How do we identify them and what we define them? Okay, how we define them as movers. Okay, so we can know that your state of residence. So for most part of the paper, when we talk about movers, we're going to focus on people who move across state line. Okay, and so we can identify them as mover if they move exactly once. Okay, so if you move more than once, then it's kind of hard, especially later on, we're going to have an event study framework that with like multiple years. If you move more than once in the period of time, then it will be hard to identify whether you're before and after the move, right? And the one part is that we do not know exactly when they move. Okay, and because it could be that they might move in between the quarters, and then like we know their residence, I think like once every quarter or something like that. Okay, and so what we're going to do, especially I told you that we can actually see where they shop. Okay, and we find that the graph is shown in our paper is that before you start moving to a new state, you actually already start making some parts of your purchases in that state. Okay, meaning that it's probably not surprising. Before you move to a new place, you actually go there to shop to find your apartment, and then you start kind of already maybe interviewing for jobs. You already make frequent trip to that places. Okay, so some of your purchases are already being made in that new state. Okay, so what we're going to do is, since we don't know exactly when you move in the year, okay, so we are going to exclude the year of the move from our main sample. So later on, when I refer to the first quarter after your move, the second quarter after your move, okay, we're excluding the year of the move, and then meaning that referring to the first quarter after the year of your move. Okay. And our key variable that we can have is, since the Nelson data tell us how many adults are in your household. And so we are just going to take the entire household purchase and divide that by the number of adults that's above age 21. And the main outcome variable will be this quantity of the pure alcohol purchase. So that's the formula we use. So we adjusted for like wine and liquor being higher ethanol concentration. And the other part is that we need to figure out which is the low consumption versus the high consumption state, right? So we are going to compute the state level averages for alcohol purchase, okay, using the data of the non-movers. So for each state, you can imagine for each state, we can calculate, like just restrict it to the non-mover, calculate how much alcohol consumption is there per adult. And we'll take your origin state and then compare that to your destination state. Okay, so this delta will be the gap between the destination and the origin. So it could be positive, it could be negative. If you move to a place with higher alcohol consumption on average, then that means it's a positive number, but it can also be negative if you move to a lower alcohol consumption place. So you can see this on the right, the ones on the right, that means you are moving to the place where it has more alcohol consumption. If on the left, that means you are moving to a place with lower alcohol consumption. And you can see the symmetry here, right? It's quite symmetric. This is the share of the movers. So some people move to the high, some people move to the low. It's not just like all in one direction.
Well, I mean, it's not really you move to the high. It's like you increase your consumption.
No, we don't know.
No?
We don't know your own consumption yet. So this Y with the bar
okay, so
is the state level average.
Right, yeah.
And this is from the data set, not the state level alcohol consumption data, right? Which
yeah, this is all from the data set. And then actually, this is all from the data set. And then before you were asking me, I think it was James, right, asking me about the quality of the data. Like, so for instance, we can verify that in the US, it's pretty well known that Utah is a state with low alcohol consumption. Okay, and then we can actually see that in our data set that indeed Utah is one of the lowest consumption states among all the states.
Elaine, can I ask a couple of quick questions?
Yeah.
So the first one is, basically, you know, if I think of it, alcohol as an addictive good and think of it from the point of view of rational addiction models, then my past consumption and my future consumption will have a bearing on how much I'll consume on a particular day, right? And we know that, like, you know, in the Becker model, stressful events can get you down a rabbit hole, right? Get you on a path of addiction very quickly, even if it's short term. Migration tends to be a stressful event for many, right? So how does that play into your, you know, what you have said so far? And also, like you talked about moving across states, we know that there are certain states where deaths of despair are super high, right? And these are states that consume a lot of alcohol, and some people have argued that it's because of the economic situation and the family situation. So anyone who's moving to a deaths of despair state per se is obviously having a downturn in his life, to some or her life, right? And so to what extent is just the nature versus nurture versus a shock to your life in that particular moment? So nurture has two parts, right? So one is at destination, what you're exposed to, and what has happened in your life in the past 2 years, right? So how,
those are very, very good question. So the first part is that wait till you see the results, but our results, initially I was a little bit worried about it too, that is it all about the initial responses, okay? Because like you said, right, like it should be like today's consumption depend on yesterday's consumption, right? And so we actually found a very long-term persistent effect. So it's not just the first quarter you move, you all of a sudden increase, and then you later drop back. It's actually very persistent over time. Okay, and the other part is about this kind of like the death of despair. Like there are some states in the U.S. that are well known to be, or at least like they have high unemployment rate at the moment, right? And then so we worry about the movers being the type of people who may be losing job. That's why they need to move to a new state, or maybe they are getting a new job. That's why they need to move to a new state, right? So we also worry about that too. And so what we did was we restricted to, in one of the robustness check is that we restricted to people with at least their self-reported employment status staying the same, or marital status staying the same. Because you worry that a lot of times people move because they got divorced. And then so we restricted to the people with the same reported status before and after. Okay. Yeah. And then also we actually control for destination state fixed effect. We can do these kind of state fixed effect, like the origin state fixed effect, destination state fixed effect. We can do that in our analysis too.
Yeah. Just a quick clarification, if I can ask. On this slide, you have uppercase Q, which is total alcohol purchased. And then in the bottom line, you have alcohol consumption, lowercase y. So I'm wondering what these mean. So the uppercase Q is total alcohol purchased by a family unit, is it? A household? And is the lowercase y then a sort of per capita measure? I mean, it seems to me that per capita is really where you want to go to.
Yes.
Can you just explain those variables?
So this Q is the alcohol purchase total for the household. And
Yeah.
then we take that divided by per adult, per capita.
Per adult. So it
Per
is,
adult.
so the lowercase y is adult per capita consumption of alcohol.
Yes, and
is,
then the average of that adult consumption.
Right, good, thanks.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, I guess related to that is, so the family, so there's one person in the scanner data that is this, or how, just, I mean, I think that's non-trivial here in the sense that people are moving, and am I 21 and living with my parents, or like, what is that division here in that there's who scans, right? Is everyone in the household scanning, or just to tease that out a little, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I actually don't know exactly who, I mean, like, do they take turns to scan or is it, I actually don't know about that. I can check with my co-author. She's the one who is like, who exactly is doing the scanning, Yeah, I actually don't know. But let's assume that everyone in the household, there's a scanner. I imagine, this is what I imagine, right? There's a scanner at home, and then like, and then every time that you walk in the house, if you buy something new, you're supposed to scan. That's what I imagine it to be. But whether it's actually that or not, I need to verify with my co-author.
Excuse me, but when a household is split, I mean, do you still follow in both?
So we don't include those households if they split, like basically. Yeah, and I don't think they will include both. They, I think they mainly follow the household head. So in case of the marital dissolution, then they would follow just the household head, not the split off household. And that's why it's somewhat important for us to look at, like, make sure that we are restricting to the people whose family are staying the same way. Okay, in our analysis. So this is just to compare the sample of ever mover to non-movers. Okay, that you can see the ever movers, they're quite different. Okay, that on average, ever mover drink more. On average, ever mover are more likely to be, slightly more likely to be white, and then they have a slightly higher education level. Okay. So let's first start. We're going to approach this first using the event study framework. That means we will be able to look at what is it that like your consumption pattern prior to your move to the period after your move. Okay, and then later on we're going to be looking at difference in differences estimate. Okay, so first, the dependent variable here is the alcohol purchase. Okay, so this is your household, right? When we say mover, we are thinking about moving household. Think that way. Okay, it's the moving household, I. Okay, but then Y is the per capita. Okay, per adult. Okay, and in period T, your alcohol purchase will, depending on, there's a household fixed effect, there is the time fixed effect. And we'll be able to see relative to the time of your move, right? Prior to your move, okay, so 2 quarters prior to your move, 1st quarter prior to your move, to 1 quarter after your move, 2 quarters after your move, excluding the period of the year of the move. Remember that, okay? And the delta that we're interested here, delta is measuring the gap between your origin and then the destination state. Okay, and so the theta -1, okay, that indicates we're reference to compare to the quarter before the year of their move, and then we set that to 0. We normalize that to 0. So it's all relative to the quarter before your move, how much more or how much less do you consume afterwards, okay, like in terms of narrowing that gap. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, quick clarification. So these delta I doesn't change over time.
It actually doesn't change over time. So we check. In the beginning, we thought, okay, maybe we can try to use some like state time. Okay, right? We can measure, instead of state averages, we can do state year average. Okay, but it turns out that there's very high correlation. Okay, there is not much change within state over time.
Okay.
So
Alright.
we decide to just use state like as an average. Yeah.
Okay.
So they don't change over time. Okay. And so what is the key identifying assumption?
Sorry. There's something confusing on your regression. The delta I is not changing across time.
It's not.
So, and how the parameters are changing, how the thetas are changing.
You only move once, right? So these are individual, and then the delta is actually measured at the state level. And then so we'll look at,
delta is a state level. Okay.
yes, delta is a state level measure.
I see.
So it's actually the gap between the origin and the destination state.
Yes, but okay, but it didn't do this. I mean, in principle, you could do delta IT if you want.
If we really, really want to, we could.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Or at least the T. It probably. I think if I were to do it exactly, it would be the T at the time of your move.
Yes.
Delta I T at time of move, except what we found is that T at time of move is basically delta IT doesn't really change.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, because I mean it's just I see, it's a very small increment. Okay. Thanks.
No problem. So one of the key identifying assumption is that what if, okay, the worry would be that the movers who move to the higher alcohol consumption state, they would have increased their alcohol consumption anyway. Right? For instance, you might think that the type of people who move to Utah that I just said, which have very low alcohol consumption, maybe they're the type of people who want to cut back their drinking. That's why they move to Utah, right? Or the people who move to New Hampshire, which is a well-known high consumption state too, are the people who like to party. That's why they move to New Hampshire too. Okay, and so that will be our worry. And then so we can actually check their behavior prior to their move. Okay, so on the x-axis, okay, here is we're checking 1 year before your move minus 3 years before your move, okay, in terms of the gap before your purchases, okay, 1 year minus 3 years ago, okay, to see, okay, maybe you are progressively, right, if my story was right before, was that maybe you are starting to cut back your drinking over time, okay, that's why you decide to move to Utah, okay. If that's the case, then we will find that, okay, that there should be a strong correlation for even prior to your move to your actual quantity change. Okay, and however, so the y-axis is the pre-move change in quantity, okay. And whether that's correlated to where you move to, basically. Okay. And then we found that there's no correlation in terms of the quantity change for you compared to the states where you plan to move to. Okay. And then yet we found a very strong correlation here is that the pre-post move. So this is take 1 year after your move minus the year before your move. Okay, we find that if you move to a higher consumption states, okay, then now you are going to respond to that. So for the fact that this part is really flat, that means your consumption pattern does not, prior to the move, does not correspond to where you move to at all, versus the after you move, then we can really see this strong pattern. Okay, so this is one kind of satisfied, right? Trying to have suggestive evidence for maybe it's not selection into where you move to. And then we can look at the event study framework. So if the story was right about people moving to Utah, then we might start seeing that, okay, even the quarters before their actual move, they would start to cut back their drinking, okay? And then in that case, we might find a convergence to the gap, okay? So the positive number here indicate the higher the positive number, meaning that the more convergence it is. Okay, so meaning that if you move to a higher consumption state, now you're going to drink more. If you move to the lower consumption state, now you're going to drink less. And so this number, the 0.6 is roughly 0.6 here, is that the first quarter, so this is basically the first quarter after your move, because remember we exclude the year of the move already. So the first quarter after your move, okay, you are going to close the gap between the destination and the origin for 60% of the gap already. Okay, even after just the first quarter. And then the second quarter, you can see this number being very strong and persistent over time. So it's not so much about the initial shock, because my prior was that maybe some part of this is that when you first move to the new place, you might be very excited about the new place. And then that's why you might be going out more, or you might be drinking more, you might host more party. And so therefore your behavior might be very similar to the people around you because you want to host parties, okay? But it turns out that it's very persistent. So I don't think this is about that initial shock or initial change of behavior. It's really a long-term change of behavior.
So
And
Elaine,
the other,
can I push you a bit on this, and especially on the pre-trend graph that you showed before? So if this is a rational addiction model where my consumption today has a higher value if I've consumed more in the past, then my pattern of consumption over time will be convex, right? So, and in that convex pattern, the pre-trend that you showed should be flatter than after you move. No? So
yeah, and cold turkey almost also makes sense in that model, right? Like, so I think that the evidence goes to an asymmetry, right? So if you go down, like, so in a rational addiction model, cold turkey works.
Yeah.
And so that pattern looks correct if I move to a low consumption state. I think, I'm not sure that the alternate, I'd be convinced by the alternate if I went the other way. I just wonder, again, related to that in the identification, the asymmetry here, if that's something that is explored.
yeah, so right now we're not exploring. Later on, we're going to explore the asymmetry here later on, okay, in the later table. But I think when you interpret this table, this is for both moving to the high and moving to the low place. So if you think about these are average of both sides, okay, right? Yeah. So this wouldn't.
I guess my point is that there's a scenario that makes sense to me that is not completely in a lot. Your story is, for some scenarios, the story is consistent with multiple interpretations, including yours and including some others, but the separation maybe is stronger for your narrative, I think.
I'm not really following the point. Would you mind elaborate a little bit more?
So I would think that a standard rational addiction model, like your previous slide, is completely consistent with what I would think from a rational addiction model, right? Like exactly. I don't see that what you presented as evidence in support of your identifying assumption. If I think of a rational addiction model, that's my point.
So Elaine, let me rephrase it in a way perhaps that might help. So in a rational addiction model, if you're drinking, then every day your utility from drinking actually keeps going up because of the past stock, right? What that will chart out is a consumption pattern which is actually convex. So your consumption over time increases at an increasing rate, right? And the graph, if you put these two graphs together, right, you actually can chart out a convex trajectory. So it'll be flatter initially because I've just started drinking, 1 drink per day is fine. and it keeps accumulating. But then once I move, I've already had like, 10 years of 1 drink per day. Now I'm going to step up to 2 drinks per day or 3 drinks per day, right? So,
but I don't know how we can try to answer whether it's one model versus the other, because if you think about it, this also include, at least this graph also include people who move to the lower consumption state, right? So that our story would have told you that if they move to the lower consumption state, now they're going to cut back their drinking. But the rational addiction model will say, even after they move to the lower consumption state, they're still going to drink more and more every day.
not necessarily. Variants of, okay, so we can discuss this later, but there are variants where when you move and your environment actually imposes a heavier cost on you for drinking, right? For example, when people are approaching their terminal period towards death, right? Costs are more imminent, and therefore their drop in alcohol consumption also follows a convex shape, right? But yeah, we can talk about this. This is obviously your point is, I take your point that you can't identify one model versus the other, right? So I take your point.
Can I ask just a very simple question about these graphs, though? What's actually displayed here? Because your sample is, what is it, 1,300 households or something, and we have a whole lot less than that points shown on these graphs. So what is actually being displayed?
Oh, so we aggregated. So for each point, we put them in the bins. Okay, basically. So
Okay.
there are so each point is referring to a type of move, like the size of move.
Right.
So that's a state pair. Okay.
Right. Okay.
So among all the people who move, okay, to this particular state pair, which is the size of move that was being determined, and let's look at the households pre-move pattern before you move. Okay, the 3 years before your move minus 1 year before your move, how much do you drink?
Right.
How much more or how much less do you drink?
Yeah. So each point represents a bin which contains a number of similar households, right?
Yes,
Households
yes,
that,
yeah. All the
that share
household that
similar things.
move, yeah. All the household that move for from the same state pair, basically.
Good.
And
good.
we
Thanks.
average them.
Yeah.
Okay. And then so the other part of the estimation is to look at this difference in differences estimate. Okay, is that we have the similar dependent variable where the y is the alcohol consumption against per capita per adult, and then we just look at altogether post period, meaning that after your move. Okay, and again, alpha should be somewhere between 0 and 1. If it's close to 1, that means it's a full convergence. That means you are 100% aligned with the destination state. Okay, and if it's 0, that means there's no convergence. Okay,
can I ask a quick, just a clarifying question? Sorry, are you measuring alcohol consumption or alcohol purchases? I think it's purchases, right?
Yeah, so it's
Okay.
alcohol purchases, but in ethanol quantity. So it's
Okay.
not the expenditure.
Okay, but it's not, you don't really know if they're consuming it. It may be that it's customary in that state. If you go to dinner, you bring a bottle of wine and that stuff. I don't think it's a big issue, but
Yes,
I think consumption and purchases are 2 different things, maybe so.
Yeah, it's always hard, like when I try to, maybe we should be more precise with our terminology. It's the purchases. So it could be that you are actually not buying for yourself. You may be buying for the party, for everyone else to drink. Exactly.
Thanks.
Yeah, and then we'll try to address that. That's also a problem for our study too, right? Like if you are just buying for other people, and then okay. So very similar to our estimate from before. So this is the quantity that we measure, like similar to our event study finding. Our event study will tell you that it's almost like 0.6 a little bit, right? And then it goes up and down a little bit. And then so in the difference in differences estimate, it's 0.7. So that means almost 70% of the gap between after your move, that it will close the 70% of the gap, okay, between the destination and the origin state. And it's a similar measure, so you can compare column 1, that's to use the quantity purchased, and then column 5 is the expenditure, so the dollar you spend, okay, also per capita, and that's also about 0.7. Okay, and in the part of column 2, 3, and 4, we can do further breakdown by different type of alcohol. And what you find is that in general, they're all quite large, okay, especially when we have to think about the literature that I had mentioned before about fruit and vegetable purchase, right? Before we started this paper, we actually did not know what to expect because all this other work using the similar methodology, but to look at fruit and vegetable purchase, they found like after 3-4 decades, they finally closed half of the gap. And then here we found out within the first few quarters, you close 70% of the gap. Okay, and so that's we find this like to be quite large.
But can I just clarify this? So say I move from somewhere that's a beer drinking or a spirit drinking state to California, this says that I switch from drinking beer or liquor to drinking wine when I move to California. Is that so? It's not alcohol. It's actually more nuanced in that it says that it's the type of alcohol that I consume. Is that what we've got here?
Yeah, so that's it. Take column 4. Okay, so in the column 4 space where we measure the delta, let's talk about the delta first for column 4. We'll be measure the wine drinking, the amount of wine drinking in your destination state minus the wine drinking your origin state. So if you move to a place where people drink wine more, then you are going to drink wine more as well, even if you were a beer drinker before. So I know like one question was Michael, right? Was asking about maybe it's the alcohol that you bought for your friends, especially if you're going to party. Right? For instance, it could be that you moved to California and then now you go to party, therefore you bring wine instead of beer. Okay, and that could possibly explain the results here. But for the fact that, I don't know, like I was talking to my co-author about it. I said, nobody bring liquor to parties. That's what I just said, right? So we found
I fundamentally disagree. I lived in Memphis. People do bring liquor but just an aside.
Okay, yeah, so I thought that nobody bring liquor. Maybe you do bring, I don't know, scotch or something, right? Like to party. And then so,
academics.
Huh?
Socially awkward academics might bring liquor. No,
I don't know, right? So even the liquor being really high, that means it's not so much about just like bringing to the party for the friends, or you know, like that's why I thought like why the breaking down this categories are important or could be informative.
Yeah, well, actually, maybe it can help you to tease out the mechanism, you know, to what extent that this behavioral change is related to the purpose of they need to, you know, associate with people. So if there's in terms of the social interaction purpose, these 3 different type of liquors, you know, maybe one type is more like to serve that purpose, the other 2 are less like so, then maybe this can help you in that you know, the purpose to tease out the mechanism.
Okay, yeah, if you can let me know, because I don't bring liquor to party. If you can let me know which type of liquor that people will bring to party, then we can exclude them and then focus on the ones that were not bring to the party. And then we can tell you.
And it may actually change state by state.
Huh?
It may change across states.
Yeah, it probably does. So some liquor probably nobody ever bring it to the party, but just to drink on their own, right? Like to mix as a cocktail. So if there are these sets, let me know. Okay, so the other part we can see is to look at the intensive versus the extensive margin. So when we say intensive margin, meaning that just look at like whether you drink more or not, and then the extensive, so this is the dependent variable will be the quantity, right? And the extensive margin is whether you drink or not, whether you make any purchase or not in this particular quarter. Okay, and we would define you as a non-drinker if you didn't make any purchase in the past year during the period. Okay. And so we can find that if you move to a higher, and here the delta also changed to like percent of, for the extensive margin, also changed to percent of people in your state that are reported drinking, being captured as drinking in our data set versus the ones who are not, right? And then so we find that if you were reported as a non-drinker, when we say non-drinker, meaning that the past 4 quarters you have not made any purchase, alcohol purchases. And then if you move to a states where more people are drinking, okay, then you are actually 50% more likely to make an alcohol purchase. So I'm being a little bit more precise here that it's not about your own consumption because we can't really tell, it's just purchase, okay? And the other part that we were talking about this earlier about the asymmetric effect is whether you move to a place that's higher consumption. So delta being greater than 0, that means you're moving to a higher consumption state. So thinking about people moving to New Hampshire or people moving away from Utah. And then the delta being smaller than 0, meaning that it's a lower, you move to a lower consumption state. Okay, so we found that the gap convergence, okay, this is the convergence, right? Closer to 1, meaning the faster or larger convergence, okay? So it's easier to converge up, right? Easier to drink more when you move to a higher consumption state. But it's a little bit more difficult to cut down when you, when you move to a lower consumption state, okay? But I mean, I should be a little bit more careful because these 2 numbers, they're actually not really statistically significant, statistically different from each other. So even though this is a little bit lower than that, I mean, we still can't quite say that there is a symmetry here. However, for the extensive margin, we can see that if you move to a place where less of the people are drinking, then you are also going to cut back, meaning that you are likely to be not drinking anymore, right? There's also some cutting back, like if you move to the places where few people are drinking. And we perform, let me see how much time. Okay, various sets of robustness check. Okay, so first, like we are looking at different alternative sample. Remember, we talk about what if people move because they got divorced? What if people move because they are experiencing these shocks in their life, such as losing jobs? And so we can actually restrict the mover to various the constant demographics. And we can also restrict the sample to those we continuously observe before and after. And then we can include the moving year. So prior, we always exclude the moving years because we told you that we can't really identify the exact quarter of the move. And what if we just record the moving year as the post period, okay? And the fourth part is that prior in our analysis, we only have the movers, but we can actually include the non-mover in analysis. And then just basically they are serving as a comparison group included in the control as well. And then so we can see that the red line here, that's our DD estimate, which is about 0.7. And you can see regardless for the samples that we change, we use alternative sample, it doesn't really move around that much. And we can include, we can exclude people who move to and move from Utah, because maybe the people who move to and move from Utah are quite different. They could be a specific religious group, or they decide to get away from the religious group. And still that doesn't change our estimate much. Okay. And we can also change the dependent variable to alternative dependent variable. Instead of using the log, we can have the actual value. And we can also calculate the percentile rank in the quantity of the alcohol, or we can do, instead of a log, we can do this IHS transformation that really didn't change our result much. And another alternative will be, well, instead of just restricting people to the constant demographic, we can also include their demographic information. For instance, their household size, and then the number of, the number of adults in your household, the marital status, the income, the employment status. We can include all that. And we can also have the quarter since move fixed effect. And our alternative, we can cluster at a different level. Instead of cluster, so far we've been clustering at the household level, we can actually cluster at the origin state pair level. Okay. And you can see when we change that, this is the reference, which is the DD estimate from before. It's actually quite robust. Like it doesn't really change the standard error much. And then it doesn't matter too much when we include these other controls. Okay. And the other part is about, well, so far we have been talking about using state level averages. Okay. In fact, in this data set, we can use much finer averages, okay? Meaning that I can actually calculate the county level averages, okay, for all the non-movers in your county, or even all the non-movers in your zip code for how much they have consumed, right, as the average. Except you can imagine these zip code level could be noisier because there aren't that many people in your zip code that are being surveyed, right, that are included in this data set, okay? And so we can do these alternatives. So let me just show you one example. Here is the delta will be calculated at the county level. Okay, so meaning that we'll compare the origin county versus the destination county's average consumption level. Okay, and in panel A, we focus on people who move across states. Right, so we use the county level averages, but we look at people who move across state. And you'll find that the estimate are very close to what we have found before, regardless the level of the aggregation we have used. But once we restrict it to people who move inside the state, okay, then you can see the numbers are no longer significant. It's much smaller. So one reason for that is because, well, in the US, there is actually most of the alcohol regulation are at the state level. So these delta being calculated at the county within the state, there's actually not much variation. It's quite noisy, you can imagine, right? There's not much variation across counties because it's mostly driven by state regulation. Okay, so once we restrict it to the in-state move, because this delta is so noisy, basically that why should there be much changes between one county, right, Texas, like Houston versus Dallas, right, because we're all facing very similar regulation, okay, and so that this kind of fall apart. So we really are relying on this cross-state move. Our paper does face some limitation. So first is about this measure that we have, because the data set is down to alcohol purchases, right? We don't actually know much about your alcohol consumption at the bar or at the restaurants. Right. And in a way, we think that it is a limitation that we don't measure your consumption, your behavior change in the restaurant or the bar. But we argue that the off-premise, meaning that consumption at home, is actually very interesting to begin with. Because when we think of alcohol, we usually, at least for me, think of this as a social drinking thing, right? Like you go to a bar, you drink with your friends. So it's no surprising that I would expect you who move to a higher consumption state now start drinking more with your friends because you are all at the bar, your friends drink, you drink. But for the fact that we measure for off-premise, even at home, okay, that your consumption, or at least your purchases, are going up, I think that's actually quite interesting, because if anything, I would expect that the off-premise results to be smaller than the on-premise result. That would have been my prior, okay. And so I think off-premise is interesting on its own. And the other part is that could there be substitution? So for instance, that now maybe you move to a new place, instead of drinking at the bar, now you drink more at home, or vice versa. Okay, so we think that's why we restricted to, we try to address it in a few ways. Okay, so we look at people with the constant demographics, because you can imagine that maybe when we're talking about these shocks that you experience, okay, that maybe now you get divorced, and then therefore you all of a sudden used to be drinking at home, okay, and then now you get divorced, you move to a new place, you feel like you have to go out, okay, and so you drink a lot more outside, right? And that's for the on premise. So, but then even after we restricted to the constant demographics, we don't really find much changes. Okay, like it's very robust. And the other part is that the alcohol consumption, drinking on premise could possibly decrease or increase because you are new to town. So maybe you are new to town, you want to explore more, so you drink more. Or maybe you're new to town and you have no friends, that's why you drink less on premise, okay? And maybe what we found in terms of the off-premise drinking could be a short-term effect. But actually our results are very stable, and then very long-term, at least like 2 years beyond the period, and we still find a very significant and similar magnitude in terms of the effect. And next is that, remember we're talking about maybe people are hosting parties, right? Some of these could be just that now you move to a place where they drink more, and then so you host party, you buy more alcohol, okay? And so one way we're looking at, oh, sorry, this is not about that point. So we were looking at this at-home food consumption for the fact that you might think, oh, maybe they first moved to a new place and then now they're exploring the new restaurants scene or new bar scene. And in a way, we can look at, I mean, we cannot look at it conclusively, but we can look at, well, now if you move to a new place, do you also eat out more? Okay, and so we can look at these food purchases at home. Okay, and for the food purchase, we can look at the food expenditure and then the food calories, right, for per capita. And what we found is that there is basically no changes in terms of your food purchase and then food calorie after your move. Okay, so this is using similar estimate, right? Like if you move to a place where people are consuming more calories and compared to your previous states, and then now do you eat more, okay, at home? Right? And then we don't really find the effect. So in a way, yeah.
So, sorry, just real quick about that. Those coefficients don't seem statistically significant, but in terms of magnitude, they're not zero.
They're not zero, but they're not. Yeah, it's about 0.2.
Yeah, but that's one thing. Like it could be that your data is not large enough to give you a statistically significant effect. But I'd be curious to look at how is that magnitude, how does it relate to means and so on, and that might allow you to be more careful, because that suggests. I mean, I don't know what the t-stat is on that or the p-value, but it's not that far off, I would guess, from being a 10% or so. So I'd just be careful just dismissing it as zero.
Okay. Yeah. I don't remember the p-value, but
and if that was the case, if so that would suggest they buy more food now at home, which means they're more likely to be home. So then you'd have to think
it's not
through.
necessarily they buy food more. It's the fact that they move to higher food consumption state. Right now, they will buy food more at home. If they move to lower food consumption state, they will buy food less. So we run the similar regression, but in parallel, but with the food calories, and then we don't find much changes for the food, at least compared to our huge magnitude before for the alcohol.
Okay, yeah, but certainly that would allow you to get at, well, like what you said, how much are you eating out, and I'd just be careful to say this is definitely zero. That's all.
Okay, yeah, good point.
Elila, can I have one more question about this? Now we are looking at alcohol, and have you thought about another addictive product like cigarettes? Do you have that in the data, or maybe that may be one kind of thing that you are thinking of as well?
Yeah, so I talked to my co-author about the cigarette, and then she was telling me that if we want, it could be another paper. Let's see how this goes. And then, so we haven't really investigated too much. That's one thing. And then two is that I'm not exactly sure about what is the rule for scanning cigarette purchase. Yeah, And then so anyway, so she told me that, yeah, we can pound that like maybe for the next paper. So it's a good suggestion. But
okay, I'm looking forward to that. All right, thank you.
So Elaine, can I follow up on that? The cigarettes one is really informative, because you wouldn't buy cigarettes to take it as a present to a party, right? Cigarettes are usually consumed by the person, and also like you might be lending one or two here and there, but so that'll let you extract out the effect that it has on the person versus the cultural effect where you go to more parties and stuff and take it as gifts. Right.
But you could also definitely smoke more, right?
Yeah. So that's what I'm interested in. So do you smoke more, or do you buy more just to give out as presents, because you wouldn't do that, right? So that'll help you there. But I had a couple of follow-up points to what Michael said, that you could actually match the consumer surveys with the Nielsen scanner data by geography. And in the consumer surveys, expenditure surveys, you actually have information about how much alcohol they've consumed, right? So comparing for the same geography for migrants perhaps will give you a good answer to whether they're consuming it themselves or
Yeah, I think we didn't use that in our data set, but I remember my co-author, she knows a lot more about the alcohol literature. One reason we start with alcohol, it was because she has done several papers on alcohol already, and then that's why part of the reason why we didn't start with cigarette. And then like there is already a paper trying to, at least they verify that the Nielsen data, like in a way that if we look at the expenditure on alcohol, and then that in other survey, they are correlated, like in places with higher consumption are also higher, and those surveys are also higher consumption in our data set. Exactly.
So, and one follow-up question about the constant demographics. So suppose my kid grows up and starts going to college and moves out of the household and is still scanning somewhere else, right? So that would not be controlled for in this constant demographics specification, right? Because
if they report the change of household, then the household should be having fewer adults now, because your kid have moved away.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, and then that's another reason why we might want to, like, we worry before that there are some new entry households, because it could be for instance, there is like a person, right? Like basically a new household being added to the data sets, right? Like if your kids move away. That's why we want to restrict it to the households which were surveyed, basically the balance panel household that was surveyed both before and after and has constant demographics.
Thank you.
Okay. And another limitation that was somewhat discussed before was that, well, maybe the move could actually change the scanning behavior, right? So it could be, I mean, you might worry for one reason that maybe in the beginning when you first move in, it's so hectic, who's going to scan? Okay, but we don't worry so much about that, given that we found very long-term impact, right? And then especially we actually exclude the actual year of the move already, okay? But the other part is that, well, maybe like people tend to scan what they purchase from the grocery store, but not what they purchase from the liquor shop. Okay, because in the US, some places they actually allow the liquor shop, they actually allow the grocery store to sell alcohol, or even some states will allow wine to be sold in the grocery while others don't. Okay, and so we can look at the people who move between similar type of liquor control environment. Okay, or similar type of state regulation. So in the first one is we restrict the sample to all those who move between the non-liquor control state. Okay, so you move from one non-liquor control state to the other, and you found this are actually not too far. So again, the red lines are the DD estimate from before from the entire sample. Okay, and this actually is not too far off. Okay, and the second one is for those who move between the state where wine are available in grocery store, and then this is where move between the states where beers are available in grocery store. Okay, and at least this is all within the same 90% confidence interval band, and with respect to our previous DD estimate.
Elaine, sorry for interrupting again, but can't you do something similar to what Hunt Alcott did, that you could actually fix the grocery store and then compare the natives versus migrants, right? So they have data on the grocery store where you're shopping, right? And so Nielsen has data on that, right? So can't you fix the store and then compare the natives who shop there versus the migrants who shop there? Right, just to get around this idea that they are moving to, maybe migrants are selecting into bad neighborhoods with a lot of alcohol shops around. So can you not do within groceries?
That was not our concern before. Okay, now you bring up a new concern. Okay,
sorry about
previously
that.
we were doing that was because we worry that people are moving to different type of state, right? And then not because people moving to a different type of neighborhood. But now you're bringing up the point that they might be moving to different type of neighborhood.
But that's kind of the Rocchetti point, right? I mean, that neighborhoods are important, right? So I don't know, but just throwing it out there, just in case you can do something about it.
Yeah, we could, but I have to think about what else. Okay, so the other part about the mutation is that we were comparing only looking at the movers. So you might argue that movers are very different from non-movers, okay? And for instance, I've told you that movers are more likely to be more educated and are actually has more year of education, and then more likely to have a job. Okay, so but what I'm going to show you here is we're not trying to argue movers are different from non-movers, but what we're trying to argue is that alcohol is very different from non-alcohol. Okay, because if we just look at, especially if we look at just the yellow bars here, these are different products that we could have looked at using our data set. And then we can run the exact same regression, calculate the state level averages, right? And from the destination to the origin. And then what we found is that in none of these other outcomes, the food that you consume, none of them are related to, they would not be statistically significant. So it seemed to be that only alcohol is where we find that to be significant. When people move, they really converge to the level of the destination, but not for the drinks, not for the food and vegetable that you eat, not for the calories that you consume.
So to the extent that taxes are at the state level and hence prices are at the state level, and so I move to a state where the prices are different and that they don't impact the other things in your list, is that so? If I write down an equation here, on the right hand side I'm going to have prices and income, and state level prices for all of these beverages are different. And so I would expect my behavior to change in that way, whereas it's not clear to me that the tax rate on cola or whatever does vary by state, right? So I've got a bunch of things here where I think that the prices are constant when I move, and then you provided a list of things where I'm quite sure that the prices are variable across state, and so why would I not expect to see that pattern?
Yeah, that's true. I guess
Elaine,
that's also the point.
Sorry, before you answer. So we are about to run out of time, and my job is to manage the time. So I'm sure Elaine probably will be happy to stay a bit longer, right? But if you feel the need to leave early, feel free. I'll officially conclude at this moment, but if you want to stay for a little longer, feel free. Okay, please go on.
Okay, that was a very good point. And then the other part, so to say that our point here is that alcohol is very different from all the other type of goods that you consume. And then for one is that there's a big room, like a room for policy to change your alcohol consumption here, right? Compared to the other ones where there is no, there's no, like you said, there's no prices control at the state government level in terms of levying tax for the soda. Okay, so that could be one reason why you found that alcohol to be particularly responsive, because there are these environment, which a part of that environment is actually the state level regulation. Yeah. So in the I'm actually going to skip this part because I know that I only have 1 minute, but I can tell you very quickly what we did is that we can never get to the actual mechanism for why people are drinking more, okay? And sorry, why do they converge, right? Like whether it's actually in terms of the consumption, is it due to the state level policy changes, or is it due to the peers, or there could be various mechanisms, or is it could due to the supply environment? So we did a very quick, basically like a lasso on trying to understand. This is just basically correlation. It's not causation. We're using different kind of state level characteristics, trying to understand which would contribute to your alcohol consumption. And what we found is suggestive that when there is more supply, then people are going to drink more. And then when the alcohol prices are low, people are going to drink more. But this is just correlational. It's not causal. Okay. And so to conclude, okay, what we find is that basically the gap between the origin and destination is going to, in terms of alcohol consumption, is going to be close within the pretty much assume after you move. And also this 2/3 of the gap is going to be closed. And then there's a very long-term impact and quite stable over time. Okay. And it seemed to suggest that there is a huge a very important role in terms of the state government can play in terms of curbing alcohol consumption, because they can change the environment quite easily just by levying tax or changing the supply condition of the alcohol. Okay.
All right. So thank you so much. Now, Elaine, I'm sure you want to stay a bit longer. Are you able to?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so now if you have questions, please feel free to ask.
Anyone? Yes, I'll go first. Sorry, yeah. James, go ahead.
James.
I have a general contextual question. So if there are specific ones on this, I'll.
So my question was regarding how your findings contrast with David Atkins' work, for example, right? Like he finds that there's almost no convergence, right? And you're finding quite the opposite, right? And which to me is not a problem, but it kind of is an avenue to explore that, as you said towards the beginning, that alcohol might be a totally different beast compared to food consumption, right? And if you can explore more as to why it's a totally different beast, right? Because of the social context that we were talking about, that'll make the paper even more interesting to me, right? So just that, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Like compared to, yeah, I mean, David Atkins' work that was on food, and then but then you might argue that there's this is also about the supply or the state level variation too, right? Like in that kind of work, there is not much changes in the state regulation for food, right? And then so maybe that's why we tend to find, because you can imagine in the destination origin, the supply or the state regulation could be very different for alcohol. That's why you respond to that, but there's not change of that in food. And that's why they don't find it. And yeah, but it's definitely one possible direction that we can look at.
All right, any more questions?
I guess my comment will follow on from that. So both globally and within the US, there's strong evidence of this convergence in consumption. So Julian Alston at UC Davis has some work published on this, and there's sort of Kim Anderson from University of Adelaide has this sort of global thing around this, and a lot of it is more framed, I think, around more traditional prices and income, as in trade has, you know, we used to drink what we could produce within regions, right? So cold countries drink beer, warm countries drink wine. There is this long run convergence in beverage shares. And there is also this long run convergence in alcohol consumption levels, right? Like globally, we see that heavy drinking countries are less, and low drinking countries are more. And I think that there is a broad literature here that is, I mean, I found this, I actually, thank you. This was an excellent presentation. I really enjoyed it. So let me just do that. But then, yeah, just I think there are a couple of other things that you might want to reference. So there are a couple, and offline I can ping you a couple.
Yeah, if you can send me the names, I try to capture it. It's kind of hard. So if you send me the references, that would be very helpful.
I really did find this one of the more interesting, if at 9 a.m. till 10 a.m.
We're all into figuring out the drinking pattern, right? Like trying to explain why we drink so much.
Thank you.
Elaine, one more point regarding, you know, since you're linking your work with Rod Chetty's work, right? So one of the major themes in that literature was that age at transition matters, right? I mean, if you move young, you're affected much more than if you move older, right? Can you do a similar analysis in your context? So what I'm thinking here is, if I'm a 70-year-old Italian guy who has always smoked his entire life, right? Say, I move to a new place that doesn't smoke or doesn't drink, I'm not going to change my behavior as much, right? But if I'm young, I'm a college-going kid, I go to college parks and everyone's drinking there, I'm much more likely to take up the new habit, right?
It's a little bit harder. It's a good suggestion, but it's a little bit harder because we only have the household level.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, I know we can identify, right? Like, do we just use the household head's age, right? Or, and then, yeah, so that could be hard. Yeah.
Fair point. Yeah.
All right. I guess there are no more questions. Thank you so much, Elaine, for this interesting question. I guess.
Thank you for inviting me. I got a lot of good comments. That's great.
Yeah, it's probably time to have some wine.
Do you drink, Simon? Do you drink more wine now moving to Australia?
I do, but it's just sad that every night I drink alone because no one else in my household actually drink wine.
We have since the China tariffs, we have a large domestic surplus of wine to consume.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Oh wow! So now the price has gone down, or?
Yeah, I'm an ag econ person, so those so we're pretty focused on those issues at the moment.
So you have to help stimulate the local economy by drinking more at the moment, right?
We have more wine and also more lobster.
Oh wow, that's a nice feature to have.
We also have more barley for beer production as well, and more sorghum, which is, I think, used in that Chinese beverage I mentioned as well. Like there's some issues with sorghum as well. So like, yeah, everything that's agriculture that goes into booze and that goes into China is a little bit restricted at the moment.
Why was there a restriction?
We're having a little bit of a
trade war, yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
Wow, you sound like you're completely locked down.
Yeah, Google Australia trade war China.
Okay, it's not just because of the COVID. It's actually a real trade war.
Yeah, so we have. It is not of anything to maybe not of interest to others, but yes, in the agricultural produce section. In barley, wine, and a range of other products that we crayfish. We have a large dispute with China. These are baseless. I have the literal translations of the stuff on the barley dispute. It's hilarious. It will take us years to resolve, but my view is that we are the tip of the spear in the Cold War.
Okay. All right. That's interesting to learn.
Well, just FYI, Elaine and I both from Taiwan. We're always on the front line of this Cold War.
We're in the most dangerous place in
we're
the
on the
world.
Taiwan side.
Okay, right. Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Thank you so much, Elaine, again.
Yeah,
Hope
thank you.
sometimes in the future we'll have you in person to visit us.
I hope so. Yeah, I'm sorry that didn't work out with the COVID, but thank you for inviting me to give this talk even virtually. That's great.
Yeah, all right. So I hope that you find some comments are helpful, and thank you so much. I'm going to close this for now.